Welcome to Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reed. I think of the journey of life as a road that we're driving down. We get to speed up on the straightaways, ease back on the curves, and I don't know about you, but I've certainly had the obstacle in the roadway that I never expected to see, and I had to either slam my brakes on or swerve to avoid hitting it. But whether we're talking about our careers or relationships or even just managing through life's phases, life is all about shifting and moving from one place to another. The challenge is that sometimes, in trying to get from where we were to where we want to be, we can get stuck while we're trying to shift. And we land in what I call the neutral space, where we're applying old ways of thinking to new situations. Join me and some incredibly inspiring guests as we talk about what it takes to shift into gear and get to where you want to be. Because here's the deal. If you're sitting in neutral, you're going nowhere. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reed. So, I hope you heard the episode last week, which was the second part of an interview that I did with Elizabeth Cowper. She just has such phenomenal energy, great energy, like just inspiring to talk with her. And we talked about what it took for her to take the step to start this company that she started. She started a company called Ludo, which is it's a platform that's intended to create a higher level of inclusion in the workplace. Go back and listen to it if you haven't. She's phenomenal. I wanted to talk today about the concept of being bold and what that means. We think historically about people who are bold as having taken these significant steps, these giant leaps of faith, okay? And to the point where, you think about Rosa Parks. That's a great example, right? Incredibly bold, historic significance to her decision. Think about Martin Luther King facing his fears. You think about people who, marched across the bridge in Selma. Tremendously bold moves, putting fear aside, right? But bold can mean other things in everyday life. Those are amazing accomplishments, and each of those examples took massive courage. And it took massive courage for Elizabeth to do what she did. And we can think of many entrepreneurs who were incredibly bold and stepped out and made a decision to do something that had massive impact on their lives and frankly on history. But we all have that capacity. That is not a special sauce, okay? It's not a special sauce to be able to look at a situation and decide what the move is that you really need to make if you weren't afraid. Because the difference between being bold and not being bold is leaning into fear. It's leaning into calculated risks, okay? And it's having the self-confidence and the innate belief that everything's going to work out. You'll figure out how to do it, okay? So taking that to an everyday life scenario, okay? What do you need to do? And what do you need to think about in order to be bold in your everyday life? It doesn't mean you have to go start a business. It may mean a simple thing. It may mean stepping up and telling somebody at work to stop behaving in a certain way towards you. It may mean self-advocating. It may mean quitting a job without having one to go to because you're so incredibly miserable in it. Okay? It may be learning how to have a direct conversation with somebody because you are going to stop fearing conflict. All of those things can require a level of boldness in order to do them. And what bold really means is facing fear. Bold means stepping into the fear, understanding what it is, and coming to terms with the fact that the fear of not doing something or the risk of not doing something is far greater than the consequences of what action will result in. Okay? So let's just take that on a On a really simple scale, I'll give you an example in my own life. And this is just a tiny little thing. But I can remember I went to Greece in 2016. I took my kids to Greece for a trip, and it had been a really difficult year for all of us. I was going through a really significant personal challenge and transition. My kids were going through it, and we went to Greece. And I am absolutely terrified of heights. I shouldn't say terrified. I'm not paralyzed by them, but I definitely struggle with heights. Let me put it that way. And so we're in Greece and we're in Santorini, and we're looking down at these people who are jumping off this cliff into this beautiful blue pool of water. And we're like, oh yeah, that looks great. We should go do that. And I'm watching all these people doing it. And I'm like, well, it can't be that big of a deal. They're all doing it. I can do it. So we go down and we figure out how to get down there, and we swim out to this cliff and we climb up it. And I get to the top and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. There is no possible way I can jump off this cliff. And to me, in my mind, as I think back on that cliff, I mean, I think it's 10 stories high. Okay. I think it's like, and my kids laugh. They're like, Mom, it wasn't that big of a cliff. To me, it might as well have been the Empire State Building, right? Because I don't like being up there in the first place. And I'm up there, and there's a couple other people who are there with me. And my kids are jumping off and they're thinking nothing of it. And I had to totally get inside my head and say to myself, what is the worst thing that's going to happen here? And I realized that the worst thing that was going to happen was I was going to be afraid. That sensation I was going to have when I stepped off was going to be utter panic. But I watched, 25 people do this, and not one of them died as a result of it. I'm jumping feet first, okay? It's obviously clear. You can see that there's nothing there. And so I rationalized this, and no matter how I looked at that, I had a really hard time getting myself to step off. I'm telling you, I was up there for half an hour, 45 minutes trying to get away from the wall that I was leaning against and step off and jump into the cliff. And then there was this woman who came up, and she was very dramatic and obviously wanted to be very dramatic about it, and was, fearful, and I can't do it. And she actually started like urinating out of fear. I actually don't think it was really out of fear. I think it was the drama, because everybody was laughing and encouraging her. And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, if I don't do that, that's what I'm going to be. What am I going to be if I don't do this? Am I going to walk back down that cliff? I mean, is that what I want to leave Greece saying I couldn't just step off the edge? And I stood there watching this woman, and I literally basically said, excuse me, I got to go, and jumped off the cliff, because I'm like, that is not going to be me. And I'm here today to talk about it. I didn't do it a second time. I did it one time. I hold that memory so clear in my consciousness, because I realized that the only thing that was holding me back was that 1 second, that sensation in 1 second that you have when you have to take that step. That every other thing around it was a very, very calculated risk that I had evaluated very clearly. I had to realize I had tremendous confidence in my ability to understand the risks about something and not do something stupid, because there is a difference between being bold and being stupid. Those are two very different concepts, okay? So there was no reason not to do it, except for that sensation I would have in that first 2 seconds that it took to just, not even half a second, to just take that step. And once I did it, and I was going down what seemed like forever before I hit the water, I was thinking to myself, I stepped. I took that step. And that sensation of having leaned into what I was afraid of was so much greater than that fear I had in that first half a second, that I hold in my memory that calculation, or that balance, right? The way that the scales balance, that this was the satisfaction I had. And this was really, in reality, the level of fear that I had, right? And the satisfaction was so much greater. But our minds can play tricks on us where we believe that moment, that first step, that is so paralyzing that it can't possibly be greater than the satisfaction. And odds are good that is never the case. Most of the time, that is not going to be the case. So in everyday life, it requires us stepping back and really understanding what we are afraid of. Because in that moment, I went through, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of dying. Well, the odds are good that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm looking at it and, I know this is high to me, but I've just watched 25 people do this quite well. And none of them were trained divers in Acapulco, okay? Most of them had never done this before. So they didn't have a skill set that I didn't have, okay? That's number one. So I'm afraid of dying. That's what I was afraid of. What else? What else was there? Nothing. So once I stepped into what am I truly afraid of, I was afraid of that feeling I would have when I stepped off and gave up control for that instant. That's what my fear was. And the more that we step into understanding the fear, the less power it has on us. And the more able we are to be bold for ourselves in that moment, in whatever bold means to us. So think about the things that you have in your life right now, that if you asked yourself this question, what would I do if I were not afraid? And then step into what the fear is, what it really is that you're drilling down on. I remember when I first started my business, when I started my executive search firm, what was I afraid of? I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of not making money. And so then I had to sit down and say, okay, well, how much money do I really need to make? And once I calculated it out and I looked at it and I said, well, how often in my life have I not made that amount of money? Have I not had confidence I could make that amount of money in the short term to know that this is going to work? And I stepped into it and made a calculated risk and did it. Okay. So we tend to stay in situations that may not be healthy for us, that may not be serving our purpose, that may not be bringing out the best in us, that may not be enabling us to move forward. And we do it out of fear. We stay on top of that cliff, looking over the edge at the beautiful blue water, because we're afraid of a moment. The key is to imagine yourself in that moment. And what is the worst thing that's going to happen? What is the worst thing that could happen? Calculate that out. And what is the worst thing that will happen if you don't step in? If you are not bold in the moment, what is going to happen? And odds are good you're either going to have to walk back down that cliff or you're going to have to stay exactly as you are. And when you think about life or you think about your situation 6 months from now, 1 year from now, how does it feel to stay where you are? Versus how does it feel to have taken the step into the water? That's what being bold really means. Being bold is about calculated risks. So I would suggest to you, if you're struggling with anything, if you're struggling with having a direct conversation, I deal with this a lot of times when people call me and they're unhappy in their roles. They don't know what their future is in their current company. And I will say to them, what's stopping you from asking that question? And inevitably, it's they don't want to hear the answer that they don't have a future at that company, that they've reached their plateau, that there isn't anything else there for them. And I ask the question, what is the downside of knowing that? The downside of knowing that is you got to deal with it now. Now you know the answer to the question and you have to make decisions. Okay? You're trying to make them anyway. Now you're making them with more information than you had before. So being bold is different to everybody. And it's different in any situation. Sometimes being bold means launching a company. Sometimes being bold means asking where you stand in your job. Sometimes being bold means self-advocating. And sometimes being bold means jumping off a cliff. Okay? Sometimes it means being willing to step out of a toxic work environment. And even when you don't have a new job, because you have enough confidence that you can figure out how to make money between now and then. What do you need to do to be bold, to make that one change, to take that one step to get to where you want to get to, whatever that means? Because here's the other secret. Once you start being bold on the little things, you have a mental history of succeeding at making bold decisions. And once you do that, you have the courage to make bigger ones. So do what you need to do to start establishing a track record of jumping off the cliff. That's the thought for the day. And I hope you're having a great week. Keep driving forward. Thanks. Hey, thanks so much for joining us this week on Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reed. Make sure to visit our website, www.readandco.com, for this week's show notes. And if you found value in today's episode, I would appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. All of this helps to support the show. Have a great week.